A racist cop's brutal attack on a pregnant woman shocks the town, but her husband's unstoppable quest for justice will leave everyone speechless. Watch the story that exposes the truth and changes everything. It was a beautiful morning in the quiet town of Maplewood, Arkansas. The sun bathed the streets in a golden glow, and a gentle breeze whispered through the trees. Amara, a kind-hearted and graceful woman in her mid-30s, stepped out of her cozy brick house, her hand resting lightly on her round belly. She was 7 months pregnant, and the anticipation of meeting her baby filled her with joy. Amara was excited. Her husband, Marcus, had been away on a business trip, and she wanted to surprise him with his favorite dinner when he returned that evening. She held a small shopping list in one hand, humming softly as she walked towards the local market. "You're going to love what I'm making for Daddy," she murmured, gently rubbing her belly. A tiny kick made her laugh, her face glowing with happiness. The short walks to the store were something Amara cherished. They gave her a chance to stretch her legs, breathe in the fresh air, and greet her neighbors. The people of Maplewood knew her well, often waving and exchanging warm smiles as she passed. Today was no different. She moved at a steady pace, enjoying the peacefulness of the town and the connection she felt to her community. Her thoughts wandered to Marcus's smile when he'd walk through the door. She imagined his delight at the meal she was planning and felt her heart swell with love. This moment, this peace, was everything she had hoped for. But as Amara turned a corner, the tranquil morning shattered. A police car screeched to a halt beside her, its tires grinding against the pavement. The sudden noise made her jump. She turned to see a stern-faced white officer stepping out of the car. He was new to Maplewood, and whispers about his abrasive behavior had already spread through the community. "Stop right there," the officer barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Amara froze, confusion and unease settling over her. "Excuse me, officer," she said, her tone polite but firm. "Is there a problem?" The man's eyes narrowed as if he had already decided she was guilty of something. "I need to see your ID," he said, walking toward her with an air of authority that felt more threatening than official. Amara hesitated. "I'm just heading to the store," she replied, her voice steady despite the flicker of unease. "Why do you need my ID?" The officer, whose nameplate read Cole, didn't answer her question. Instead, his expression hardened. "Because I said so," he snapped. "You're acting suspicious, and I want to know what you're doing out here." Amara's heart skipped a beat as Officer Cole's harsh tone cut through the air. She had done nothing wrong, yet his piercing gaze made her feel as if she were under a spotlight. The morning's warmth seemed to fade, replaced by a chill that prickled her skin. "I'm not doing anything suspicious," Amara said, keeping her voice calm though her pulse quickened. "I'm just going to the store." Cole's scowl deepened. "Don't play games with me," he barked, his voice laced with accusation. "Just hand over your ID." Amara hesitated, but eventually reached into her purse, her hands trembling slightly. She retrieved her wallet and held out her identification. She hoped compliance would calm the situation. Cole snatched the ID from her hand without so much as a glance at her face. He studied it briefly, then shoved it back at her. "What are you really doing out here?" he demanded, suspicion dripping from his voice. "I already told you," Amara said, her unease giving way to frustration. "I'm going to the store to pick up some things." Her response seemed to ignite something in Cole. He stepped closer, towering over her, his shadow stretching across the sidewalk. "You think you can talk back to me?" he sneered, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. "You're hiding something?" Amara's voice trembled as she raised her hand slightly, trying to show she wasn't a threat. "I'm not hiding anything. Please, let me go." The tension in the air thickened as a few passers-by slowed their steps, their curious gazes turning toward the scene. Amara's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she kept her composure, determined to end the encounter peacefully. "Stop resisting," Cole suddenly shouted, his voice booming. The words startled Amara, and she instinctively stepped back. Her hands remained raised in a gesture of compliance, but his accusation turned heads, drawing more attention. "I'm not resisting," Amara said, her voice cracking under the weight of fear and disbelief. "Please, I just want to go home." But her pleas seemed to fall on deaf ears. Without warning, Cole lunged forward, shoving her backward. Amara stumbled, struggling to keep her balance. Panic surged through her as she clutched her belly, instinctively trying to protect her unborn child. "Stop!" she cried, her voice filled with desperation. "Please don't." Her words only seemed to enrage him further. The onlookers froze in stunned silence, their murmurs rising like an uneasy tide. Cole's aggression escalated, his hostility overshadowing any pretense of authority. And then it happened. Cole's boot struck Amara's stomach, the force sending her crumpling to the ground. Gasps echoed around her as bystanders rushed forward, their faces pale with shock. Amara clutched her belly, her mind reeling in pain and terror. "My baby," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please be okay." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Amara lay on the ground, clutching her belly as searing pain tore through her body. The muffled sounds of shocked gasps and urgent voices surrounded her, but all she could think about was her baby. "Someone call an ambulance," a woman shouted from the growing crowd. Two bystanders rushed to Amara's side, their faces etched with fear. "Stay with us," one of them said softly, trying to offer comfort. Amara's tears fell freely as she whispered over and over, "Please, my baby, please be okay." Officer Cole stood a few steps away, his face blank as though he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. His attempt to regain control of the situation was met with defiance. "Everyone back off," Cole shouted, his voice harsh and commanding. But no one moved. Instead, their collective gaze turned toward him, their shock and disbelief quickly shifting into anger. "How could you do that?" someone yelled. Another bystander raised their phone, recording the scene. "You're a monster," a man in the crowd shouted. The tension on the street boiled over. Cole took a step back, his eyes darting around nervously as the crowd closed in. The wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the chaos. Within moments, paramedics arrived, rushing to Amara's side. They worked quickly, assessing her condition and carefully lifting her onto a stretcher. Her blood pressure's dropping, one of the paramedics said urgently. "We need to move now." Amara's vision blurred as the pain became overwhelming. She could barely make out the kind words of one of the paramedics. "We're taking care of you and your baby. Stay strong." As they loaded her into the ambulance, Amara turned her head weakly toward the crowd. Her tear-filled eyes locked onto Cole's, and for a fleeting moment, the raw pain in her gaze pierced through his composed exterior. Then, the ambulance doors closed, and the vehicle sped away, leaving behind a community that was no longer silent. The crowd turned its full attention to Cole. The phones pointed at him weren't just witnesses, they were evidence. The murmurs grew louder, fueled by a shared sense of outrage. "Justice for Amara," someone yelled, and the chant began to spread. Cole, now visibly shaken, retreated to his car. He drove away without another word, but the damage had already been done. Within hours, the videos captured by bystanders would spread across social media, igniting a firestorm of outrage and calls for justice. The streets of Maplewood buzzed with tension as news of the incident spread like wildfire. By the afternoon, videos of Officer Cole's attack on Amara were everywhere. Social media was flooded with hashtags like #JusticeForAmara and #StopPoliceBrutality, and the outrage was impossible to ignore. The video clips, captured from multiple angles, told a horrifying story. One showed Amara pleading with Cole, her hands raised in surrender. Another showed the moment she fell to the ground, clutching her stomach in agony. Comments poured in from people all over the country, condemning the officer's actions. How could he do this to a pregnant woman? This man needs to be arrested, not protected. We stand with Amara. Protests began forming in the town square, with people holding signs demanding accountability. Amara's neighbors, friends, and even strangers joined together, their voices united in anger and support for her. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the atmosphere was tense. Amara had been rushed into the emergency room, and a team of doctors and nurses worked urgently to save her and her baby. The trauma had caused serious complications, and every second mattered. Amara lay on the operating table, her mind clouded with fear and pain. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clung to hope. Please, let my baby be okay, she whispered over and over, her voice trembling. A nurse gently squeezed her hand. We're doing everything we can. Stay strong for your little one. In the waiting area, Maria, Amara's best friend, paced back and forth, her face pale with worry. She had rushed to the hospital as soon as she heard what happened. When she finally saw a doctor emerge from the operating room, she hurried toward him. How is she? Maria asked, her voice breaking. And the baby? The doctor's expression was serious. She's in critical condition. We're performing an emergency C-section to save the baby. It's a difficult situation, but we're doing our best. Maria nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She returned to the waiting area, her heart heavy. The thought of her dear friend enduring so much pain was unbearable. At the same time, Marcus was miles away, sitting in a meeting when his phone buzzed. He excused himself, expecting a routine call, but the voice on the other end stopped him cold. Marcus, it's Maria, she said, her voice frantic. Amara's in the hospital. She was attacked. They're doing surgery now. You need to get here. Marcus's world seemed to crumble in an instant. His heart pounded as he grabbed his coat and rushed out of the building. He didn't care about the meeting or the looks from his colleagues. All that mattered was getting to Amara. He called the airport, booking the next flight back to Maplewood. As he waited at the gate, his mind raced with fear and anger. He clenched his fists, silently vowing that whoever hurt his wife would face the consequences. Marcus's plane landed in Maplewood late that evening. His heart raced as he pushed through the crowd at the airport, every second feeling like an eternity. He grabbed a taxi, urging the driver to hurry. When he arrived at the hospital, Maria was waiting for him in the lobby. Her face was pale, and her eyes red from crying. As soon as she saw Marcus, she ran toward him. Where is she? Marcus asked, his voice shaking. Maria pointed toward the operating room. She's still in surgery, she said softly. The doctors are trying to save the baby. Marcus's knees felt weak, but he stayed upright, leaning against the wall. His mind spun with worry and rage. Who did this? He asked, though deep down he already knew. It was a cop, Maria said, her voice trembling. Officer Cole. People recorded it. It's all over the internet. He kicked her, Marcus. He kicked her. Marcus's fists clenched tightly, his nails digging into his palms. His jaw tightened as his anger bubbled to the surface. And where is he now? He asked coldly. Maria shook her head. Still on the force. They're saying he did nothing wrong. They're protecting him. Marcus took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. But inside, he felt like a volcano ready to erupt. I need to see her, he said firmly. A nurse appeared moments later, leading Marcus to a waiting room just outside the operating theater. He sat in silence, staring at the door, praying for good news. The minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Finally, the door opened, and a doctor stepped out. He looked tired but calm. Mr. Harper? He asked. Marcus stood up quickly. How is she? How's the baby? The doctor offered a small smile. Your wife is stable. It was a difficult surgery, but we managed to deliver your baby boy. He's small and needs to stay in the neonatal intensive care unit for monitoring, but he's strong. Both of them are fighters. Marcus exhaled deeply, a wave of relief washing over him. Can I see her? She's still recovering, the doctor said, but you can sit with her for a while. Marcus was led into a quiet room where Amara lay, pale and weak but awake. Her eyes fluttered open as Marcus approached. When she saw him, tears streamed down her face. Marcus, she whispered, her voice breaking. I tried to protect him. Marcus sat beside her, taking her hand gently in his. You did everything you could, he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. You're both going to be okay. I promise. But as he held her hand, a storm brewed inside him. This wasn't just about his wife and child. It was about justice. And he wouldn't rest until Officer Cole faced the full weight of the consequences. The next morning, Marcus left the hospital after ensuring Amara was comfortable. Her faint smile stayed with him, reminding him of her strength and resilience. But his heart burned with anger and a need for justice as he headed to the police station. When he arrived, the station was bustling. Officers moved about, some pretending not to notice him, while others gave him wary glances. Marcus approached the front desk, his voice steady but firm. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge about Officer Cole," he said. The desk sergeant barely looked up. "You'll have to wait. We're busy." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "I'm not going anywhere until someone talks to me." Eventually, a senior officer came out, a man with graying hair and a badge that read Chief Bradley. He motioned Marcus into his office. The room was small and plain, with a desk covered in paperwork. "Mr. Harper, I understand you're upset," Bradley began, his tone dismissive. But Officer Cole was acting within his rights. Marcus's fists clenched under the desk. "Acting within his rights?" he asked, his voice sharp. "He attacked my pregnant wife. There are videos. There are witnesses. How can you defend this?" Bradley sighed, folding his hands on the desk. "The situation is being reviewed. These things take time." Officer Cole claims she was resisting arrest. "Resisting?" Marcus said, his voice rising. "She was walking to the store. She's 7 months pregnant. What could she possibly have done to justify this?" Bradley shrugged, avoiding Marcus's glare. "We're handling it. That's all I can tell you for now." Marcus stood up, his frustration boiling over. "You're not handling anything," he said coldly. "You're protecting him, just like you always do with your own. But this time, it won't work. The world is watching." He stormed out of the office, his mind racing. The system wasn't going to help Amara. It never truly helped people like them. If anything, it shielded those who abused their power. As Marcus walked out of the station, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw several messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers had sent him links to news articles and social media posts about the incident. The whole country was talking about what had happened. One message stood out. "Let me know if you need help. I owe you one." It was from someone Marcus knew from his past life, a life he had carefully hidden from Amara. For years, he had worked in intelligence, handling dangerous situations and uncovering the truth in places where lies ruled. He had left that life behind to build a family with Amara, but now it seemed like he'd have to step back into those shadows. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. He thought about Amara lying in the hospital, fighting to recover, and their tiny son in the NICU. He thought about Officer Cole and the smug indifference of Chief Bradley. No one was coming to help. If Marcus wanted justice, he'd have to make it happen himself. Marcus sat alone in his car outside the police station, gripping the steering wheel tightly. His mind was racing, replaying the events over and over. He thought about Amara's pain, the fear in her eyes, and the helplessness he felt as the system shrugged off their suffering. He looked at his phone again, rereading the message. "Let me know if you need help. I owe you one." It was time to act. Marcus made a call. The voice on the other end answered almost immediately. "Marcus, I didn't think I'd hear from you again," the man said, his tone friendly but curious. "I need information," Marcus said, his voice firm, "on a cop named Officer Cole. He works here in Maplewood." There was a brief pause. "All right," the man replied. "I'll see what I can dig up. Give me a few hours." Marcus ended the call and leaned back in his seat, staring out the windshield. His mind drifted to the years he spent in intelligence, tracking down dangerous individuals and uncovering hidden truths. Those skills felt distant now, like a part of himself he had locked away. But for Amara and their baby, he was ready to bring that part of himself back. Later that day, Marcus received a secure email. Inside were files detailing Cole's history. Marcus's suspicions were confirmed. Cole had a record of complaints, reports of excessive force, discrimination, and abuse of power. Most of the cases had been quietly dismissed, swept under the rug by the department. Marcus studied the files carefully, noting every detail. He saw patterns in Cole's behavior and connections to others who had protected him. He also saw weaknesses, small cracks in the armor of lies that had shielded Cole for so long. Next, Marcus sent a series of messages to trusted contacts, calling in favors he hadn't needed in years. Each message was short and to the point, but the responses came quickly. People trusted Marcus because he had once been the man who got results, no matter how difficult the situation. By the time he returned to the hospital, Marcus had a plan. He found Amara resting in her room, her eyes tired but open. She managed a small smile when she saw him. "How's our boy?" he asked softly, sitting beside her. "He's strong," she said weakly. "The doctors say he's doing okay." Marcus took her hand gently. "I'm going to fix this, Amara. I promise you. Cole will pay for what he did." Amara's eyes filled with tears. "Just don't put yourself in danger," she whispered. Marcus leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'll be careful," he said, "but I can't let this go. No one hurts our family and gets away with it." The next morning, Marcus was already up before dawn. He had no time to waste. He knew what he needed to do, and it had to be done carefully. He couldn't risk getting caught. The message he wanted to send had to be clear. Officer Cole would regret what he had done. Marcus headed to his office at home, where he kept a small, hidden drawer filled with old tools and contacts from his past. Inside, he found a set of encrypted devices, each one capable of sending a message that couldn't be traced. He began to work quickly, crafting a series of messages that would rattle Cole's world. As the sun started to rise, Marcus sent the first message. It was a simple package left on Cole's doorstep, printed files, photos, and documents. They weren't just any documents. They were private records of incidents Cole had been involved in, many of them swept under the rug. Marcus knew these files would make Cole nervous. And the photos? They showed him in places he never realized he'd been watched. Every movement, every secret he had hidden, now exposed. Marcus didn't stop there. He made sure the message was clear, bold. At the end of the packet was a note, written in large, bold letters. "We know everything. Make it right, or we will expose everything." By the time Officer Cole woke up and stepped out of his house to grab the morning paper, he would find the small, threatening packages waiting for him. Meanwhile, Marcus sat at the table, watching his phone. He wasn't waiting long before he saw that Cole had received the first message. A text came in from one of his contacts, telling him that Cole was already panicking. His phone had been glitching, and he had started to feel like someone was watching him. Marcus smiled grimly. It was just the beginning. The next few hours were a blur of strange events for Cole. He went out to start his car, only to find the engine wouldn't start. His phone kept shutting off, restarting on its own, making it impossible to make calls. He even noticed an unmarked car slowly driving past his house a few times. Something wasn't right. It felt like someone was toying with him, but he couldn't figure out who. By the time he arrived at work, his nerves were completely shot. His colleagues, who usually greeted him with respect, were now avoiding his gaze, whispering among themselves. Something was wrong, and they all seemed to know it. When Cole tried to talk to his superiors, hoping for some reassurance, he only got vague replies. One officer even told him, "You've made a mess, Cole. You better clean it up before it gets worse." Cole's panic grew. He was losing control of everything. As he sat in his car later that day, his phone buzzed again, this time with a video link from an unknown number. Hesitantly, he clicked it. The screen filled with a live feed from his own living room. His own home, filmed from a hidden camera. The camera panned around, showing every corner, every piece of furniture. Then it stopped at a note placed on his coffee table. The words were simple. "You messed with the wrong family. Make things right, or the world will know everything you've done." Cole's heart raced. Someone had been inside his house. They had been watching him, knowing everything about his life. He felt exposed, more vulnerable than he ever had in his career. As Marcus watched Cole's world start to fall apart, he knew it was working. The warning had been clear, but this was only the beginning. Marcus had more to do, and he was prepared to go all the way to ensure that justice was served. By the time the next day arrived, Officer Cole's paranoia had reached a breaking point. His morning routine was completely off. His car refused to start, his phone kept glitching, and everywhere he turned, it felt like someone was watching him. His nerves were frayed, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being hunted. He spent the entire morning trying to act normal, but it was clear to everyone around him that something was wrong. His colleagues avoided him, and when he tried to speak to his superiors, they gave him cold stares, whispering among themselves. Cole's usual confidence was gone. He felt isolated, like a rat in a trap. At lunch, he went to his car and found another envelope on his windshield. His heart skipped. With shaking hands, he opened it. Inside, there was another photo of him, this one showing him in a local bar talking to someone he shouldn't have been. The note attached was simple: "We know everything. There's no escape now." Cole's mind raced. How did they know all of this? He thought he had covered his tracks. Panic surged through him as he realized just how exposed he was. That evening, the pressure became too much. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video. His hands were shaking as he clicked on it. The video was a live feed of his apartment, his own living room. The camera panned slowly, showing every corner, every piece of furniture. It stopped at a note on his coffee table. It read, "Make things right, or everyone will know what you've done." Cole froze, his heart hammering in his chest. How was this happening? His house had been violated, his secrets laid bare. The fear that gripped him was unlike anything he had ever known. He couldn't breathe. His mind was spinning, and he knew he had no way out. Someone had gotten too close, closer than he ever thought possible. And now, they were going to expose him. The world would know everything. His life, his career, it was all slipping away. Desperately, Cole tried to call for backup, but his phone wouldn't connect. His hands were slick with sweat as he slammed his fist against the steering wheel in frustration. This was it. He had no control left. Whoever was behind this had the power to destroy him, and he had no idea who they were or how to stop them. Meanwhile, Marcus knew the time had come. He had carefully planned each step, each move, and now it was time to confront Cole. The message had been sent, and the pressure had built. Cole was cracking, and Marcus was ready to take the final step. Marcus sat in the quiet of his office, his phone vibrating with more messages of support. The community had rallied around Amara, and their voices were growing louder. The pressure was mounting on the police department, but Marcus knew it wouldn't be enough to get justice for Amara without more. It was time to go straight to the source. The following day, the entire town of Maplewood was buzzing with anticipation. News of Officer Cole's breakdown had spread like wildfire. Everyone was talking about it. People from all over the country were watching, waiting for the next move. Marcus knew this was his moment. He had played his part carefully, ensuring the pressure was just enough to break Cole without making it obvious. But now it was time to finish what had started. With a steady hand, Marcus prepared for the final confrontation. He knew Cole would be at the police station, surrounded by his colleagues. It was the perfect time to confront him. As he stepped into the station, the officers there tried to act normal, but it was clear to Marcus that the tension was thick. They were waiting for something to happen, and Marcus knew exactly what that something would be. Cole sat at his desk, his head buried in his hands. He looked like a man on the edge, beaten by the fear that had consumed him. Marcus walked up to him, his voice cold but steady. "Officer Cole," Marcus said, his voice carrying through the room. "You thought you could get away with what you did. You thought you could hide your secrets, but now the truth is out, and there's no way to escape it." Cole looked up at him, his face pale and eyes wide with terror. "Please," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was just doing my job." "Your job?" Marcus's voice rose. "Your job was to protect people, not harm them. And when you hurt my wife, you crossed a line that you will never come back from." The room was silent. Every officer was watching, waiting to see how this would unfold. Marcus took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Cole's. "It's over. You're done. The people know what you did, and the whole world is watching." With that, Marcus turned and walked out of the station, leaving Officer Cole to face the consequences of his actions. Back at home, Amara was recovering. She smiled weakly as Marcus sat beside her, holding her hand. "It's over," he said softly. "We got justice." Amara nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Marcus smiled and kissed her forehead. "You never had to do it alone. I'll always protect you and our family." The community of Maplewood stood together, united by the truth. Officer Cole's resignation came swiftly, and the department began to reevaluate its actions. But for Marcus and Amara, their fight was more than just about one man. It was about making sure this never happened again. If you were moved by Marcus and Amara's journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that shine a light on justice, resilience, and the strength of the human spirit. Every like and share helps spread the message. Together, we can make sure that these stories never go unheard. Stay tuned for more, and thank you for being part of this important movement.